Hey everybody, and welcome to another live stream from Northeast Christian Apologetics. Tonight we're doing our Monday night book study. We do this every Monday night at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, and what we do here is read books together and talk about them. I provide you my insights and my inputs while we read the books together, and you can also ask me questions in the chat and also just provide some input and insight. And we can have just a book study together. We are discussing tactics, as we have been for the past 11 weeks. We are up to Chapter 12, which is Sibling Rivalry and Infanticide. So a little bit about the author, just as I do every week. Greg Koukl. He runs a ministry called Stand to Reason. He does good work. Definitely check him out. And you can get Christian books, tactics at Amazon.com as well as Christian books. So, definitely think you guys should be having this in your library and reading it on your own and taking notes and having highlights and stuff like that. Make sure you make this book your own. And as always, as well, when we're doing this is YouTube, so I got to ask you to subscribe. Trying to get this information out to as many people as I possibly can, as conveniently as possible as well. Want them to be able to enjoy these books. Perhaps they're interested in having conversations, but they're blind and can't seem to afford an Audible book or something like that. This would be a nice thing for them to be able to listen to. Or perhaps you just want somebody to walk through the book with you. I'm here for that, A little update on Northeast Christian Apologetics. So at the church, we usually meet the church in New London. We have Apologetics 101 going on, part 3, and we are moving it from Wednesday night to Thursday night. So we're going to be doing a Thursday night instead of Wednesday night this week, and we're going to be discussing the problem of evil. So that's in New London, and if you have any friends out in New London that they're having trouble with the problem of evil, this would be an excellent time to come out. We've discussed the problem of evil in our book study before when we were reading On Guard with Dr. William Lane Craig. I recommend you check that one out. That was our fun little Halloween live stream. I had fun with that one. I created an interesting overlay and had some fun stuff going on in the background, but we had fun that night. And last Saturday at Castle Church in Norwich, we had to cancel because of snow. So we are going to be restarting on this coming Saturday, God willing. And we'll be discussing limitations with apologetics, as well as the Christian worldview. So we're going to be talking about what the Christian worldview is and what the limitations of apologetics are. So, I hope to see you guys there, or tell a friend. Remember to share this content so that you can help me out to reach more people, so that people can be strengthened in their faith and have more resources available to be a fruitful citizen of the kingdom of God. We want to be out there and helping people enter into the kingdom as well as stay in, So I think this is a worthy endeavor. And I really appreciate you guys being a part of it. Also, let me know in the chat if you're here and if you want to say anything. We are transitioning to different stuff going on at my house right now. So we are. My daughter's coming down to visit. Just 1 second. She sounds upset. All right. So, thanks for your patience. But yeah, we're going to be starting up chapter 12 on tactics tonight, and so, like I said, we're going to be talking about sibling rivalry and infanticide. The sibling rivalry is talking about when one person says two positions that are in conflict with each other, and when that happens, we can make them aware of that by asking questions or diving into it more. And infanticide is the idea that the idea dies before it even gets going. And so this would be like if you see your significant other's phone sitting somewhere, and you on your phone text your significant other and be like, hey, you left your phone here, they're not going to get it. They're not going to get the information. Or and Koukl is going to provide us with more examples in the book. So thanks again for coming out tonight, guys. I appreciate it. But without any further delay, we can go ahead and jump into the reading. All right. So chapter 12 of Tactics. Koukl says, arguments or points of view can self-destruct for a variety of reasons. We have already talked about two, formal suicide and practical suicide. Now I would like to introduce you to a couple more examples of suicide that are not internally contradictory, but are self-defeating in their own unique ways. Sometimes a conflict arises when a person raises two objections that are at odds with each other. The sibling rivalry is easy to spot if you look for it. At other times, someone's view is built on a prior concept that turns out to disqualify the view itself. I call this infanticide. Think of it like a deranged creature from a sci-fi movie that devours its own offspring. This kind of suicide is more difficult to spot, but it is a powerful defeater nonetheless. In either case, if you look closely, you will discover that the hard work has already been done for you. All right, so sibling rivalry. Occasionally in conversations, you will notice something odd. You will hear a pair of objections voiced by the same person, but the complaints are logically inconsistent with each other. They are like children fighting between themselves, siblings in rivalry. Since both objections cannot be simultaneously legitimate, your task is cut in half. A fair-minded person will surrender at least one when you identify the problem. Graciously point out the conflict and ask which is the real concern. Sometimes this move effectively silences both objections because the person you are talking with realizes she has been unreasonable. Is Gandhi in heaven? When I was in India, Christian apologist Prakash Yasudian told me of a conversation he had with a Hindu about Gandhi, who is much revered there. Notice how Prakash coupled Colombo with the sibling rivalry tactic. Is Gandhi in heaven? The Hindu asked. Heaven would be a very poor place without Gandhi in it. Well, sir, Prakash answered, you must at least believe in heaven then. And apparently you have done some thinking about what would qualify someone for heaven. Tell me, what kind of people go to heaven? Good people go to heaven, he responded. But this idea of what is a good person is very unclear to me. What is good? In typical Hindu fashion, he replied, good and bad are relative. There is no clear definition. If that is true, sir, that goodness is relative and cannot be defined. How is it you assume Gandhi is good and should be in heaven? Either Gandhi fulfills some external standard of goodness, thus qualifying for heaven, or goodness is relative and therefore a meaningless term when applied to anyone, including Gandhi. Both cannot be true at the same time. All right, so Kavita. During that same trip, I had a discussion with a Hindu college student named Kavita. As I talked about Christianity, she raised a standard objection. If God is, as you say, how could he allow such suffering, especially for the children? She gestured with a sweep of her hand, as if to take in the collective anguish of Madras, which it was great. The first thing I pointed out was that God hadn't done this to India. Hinduism had. Ideas have consequences, and the suffering in Madras was a direct result of things Hinduism teaches and Hindus believe. I then explained that it wouldn't always be this way. A day would come when all evil would be destroyed, and Jesus himself would wipe away every bitter tear. How could that be, she objected. Evil and good exist as dual poles. If you have no evil, it's impossible to have good. Each must balance each other out. I noticed immediately that Kavita's response was at odds with her first question. Let me repeat this reasoning back to you, I said, and you tell me what you think of it. She nodded. You ask, why are innocent children starving in the streets? I answer, good and evil exist as dual poles. Children starve in Madras, so children in other places of the world may be happy and well. The one balances the other. What do you think? When the point sank in, she was forced to smile. Touché, she replied. That's a good reply. All right, so the quarrel. I encountered a clear example of sibling rivalry after an airing of The Quarrel, a film that explored the problem of God and the Holocaust. Producer David Brandes had asked me to help moderate a discussion with an audience about the moral issues raised in the movie. From one side of the auditorium, a Jewish woman offered the idea that maybe God allowed the Holocaust as a punishment for Israel's wayward drift into secularism. Some Jewish thinkers have raised this possibility in light of the promised curses for apostasy recorded in Deuteronomy 28. The reflection prompted a sarcastic, well, that's a real loving God, from the other side of the theater. I called attention to the conflict suggested by the second comment. Those who are quick to object that God isn't doing enough about evil in the world, a good God wouldn't let that happen, are often equally quick to complain when God puts his foot down. A loving God would never deliver judgment. If God appears indifferent to wickedness, his goodness is challenged. Yet if he acts to punish sin, his love is in question. These objections compete with each other in most cases. They are siblings in rivalry. One or the other needs to be surrendered. Both can't be held simultaneously. And this is very important to realize, because this is kind of a topic that you're going to come up with a lot, especially if you run the moral argument. God is evil for the kinds of punishments that he gives. And this is where it's important to have like a well thought out moral model. You need to make sure that you understand what you believe regarding morality and have studied it thoroughly, and then you can really dive into these conversations. And I've talked about moral aspects, my moral model, somewhat in some of my other YouTube videos, but like On Guard as well. Dr. Craig makes a good distinction, an important distinction between moral values and moral duties. Moral values are dealing with love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. These moral values deal with the worth of a moral aspect of reality, the worth of some action, while moral duties deal with obligation, what you ought to be doing. And so when you talk about punishment, you can say that the act that a person is doing when they punish somebody is evil, because the value of it is evil. Normally people do not want to receive evil things, so you never punish with a good thing. Like if your child is talking back to you, you don't say, don't talk back to me, and then you hand them a piece of cake. That doesn't make any sense. You treat them with something that they do not desire, something that would be considered evil, and that doesn't make you wrong for doing it. That is the right thing to do, because it's going to improve behavior. So you punish things with evil, okay? But since you're doing it in the right way, it doesn't make you evil. It makes you good, because you have good intentions and you're doing it for morally sufficient reasons, okay? These kinds of things are really important to really understand when you're having these kinds of conversations, because you're going to be running into people saying that God fails to act to prevent evil, and then when he does act as a punishment, then he is evil for doing it. Keep that in mind. All right, so who are you to say? Koukl continues. Sibling rivalry is a type of suicide moral type of suicide moral relativists commit when they object to the problem of evil. This happened at a restaurant during a conversation with a waitress. I seem to get in a lot of discussions with waitresses. At first, the young lady talked like a relativist. Everyone has his own morality. Right or wrong, or right and wrong is a private affair. Who's to judge? As our conversation ranged over other topics, though, the problem of evil came up. How could God exist when there is so much evil in the world? I want you to notice something about the problem of evil. The entire objection hinges on the observation that evil exists out there as an objective feature of the universe. That is a serious problem for relativists, though. According to relativism, when someone uses the word evil, he is expressing a personal preference. The sentence, premarital sex is wrong, means nothing more than I don't prefer sex outside of marriage, or extramarital sex is wrong for me. Strictly speaking, the person is not talking about sex at all. The relativist is talking about himself. All right, so this is, again, we're talking about moral relativism here. And just so you know, I do know Christians out there who are moral relativists, so it's not necessary for you to believe in objective morality in order to be a Christian or anything like that. But I personally think that if you say that all morality is tied up in relativism, then I think that it's a too narrow of a view. It's too narrow of a view, because there definitely does seem to be things like moral improvement. If you are living in a society where racism is rampant, taking action to make it culturally unacceptable for people to be racist seems like moral improvement. If there is moral improvement, then moral relativism then the moral landscape is not exhausted. The descriptions of the moral landscape is not exhausted by relativistic descriptions. Okay, so I personally think that there should be, there is a objective aspect to morality, and so there's nothing wrong with arguing for it. But there are other aspects of morality other than objective morality either. I also think that many Christians make a mistake in saying that all descriptions of the moral landscape are exhausted by objective descriptions. Like every aspect of morality is objective, and I think that's a mistake as well. It's too narrow. we often make ourselves too narrow. All right, so in light of Koukl continues, in that light, imagine how silly this conversation would sound. I can't believe in God. Why not? Brussels sprouts. Brussels sprouts? I remember this, like the first time I read this, oh man, this was killing me. I was like, oh, Brussels sprouts. Brussels sprouts? What do Brussels sprouts have to do with anything? Did you ever taste those things? They're awful. I personally agree with you about the taste of Brussels sprouts, but some people do like them. What does the fact that you don't like Brussels sprouts have to do with God's existence? I can't believe in a God who would create something that tastes so awful to me. This kind of objection is trivial. Oh, one more thing about the problem of evil, and I've mentioned this previously as well, that a lot of people will run the problem of evil as a justification for the lack of belief in God, and they take on, for the sake of argument, to the Christian worldview with regard to objective moral values and duties, or just objective morality in general. They take on that for the sake of argument to do a reductio ad absurdum, to make it so that you see that your worldview is false. It's absurd. But they can still be a moral relativist themselves. But a lot of people who claim to be moral relativists have not thoroughly examined their own beliefs regarding morality. And so a lot of them do actually just do this sibling rivalry act where they talk about morality being relative, and then they talk about God being there's too much evil in the world for God to exist. So this is why you have to ask questions. What do you mean by that? Why do you think that way? And that kind of stuff, and get to know who you're talking about before you just assume that, oh, you haven't thoroughly thought through your worldview on morality. Clearly, you're contradicting yourself here, and you don't even understand it. So don't assume a person's ignorance. Ask questions. Make sure you're asking questions. So Koukl continues. This kind of objection is trivial, of course. If relativism were true, talk of evil as an objection to God's existence would be nonsense. The complaint would be nothing more than if God were really good, he wouldn't allow things that I don't like. C.S. Lewis summed it up this way. Of course, I could have given up my idea of justice by saying it was nothing but a private idea of my own, relativism. But if I did that, then my argument against God collapsed too. For the argument depended on saying that the world was really unjust, not simply that it did not happen to please my private fancies. To say that something is evil is to say that it is not the way it is supposed to be. This makes no sense. To say that something is evil is to say that it is not the way it's supposed to be. This makes no sense unless things are supposed to be different. Yet, this is what the relativists deny. This waitress promoted two rival concepts at the same time, subjective morality and objective evil. The objections competed with each other. They were siblings in rivalry. G.K. Chesterton saw the problem more than a century ago. The modernist goes first to a political meeting where he complains that savages are treated as if they were beasts. Then he takes his hat and umbrella and goes on to a scientific meeting where he proves that they practically are beasts. In his book on politics, he attacks men for trampling on morality, and in his book on ethics, he attacks morality for trampling on men. The belief that objective good and evil do not exist, relativism, is in conflict, rivalry with the rejection of God based on the existence of objective evil. All right. So just doing what comes naturally. If homosexuality is morally neutral because it's natural, then adoption of same-sex couples must be wrong. Then adoption by same-sex couples must be wrong because for homosexuals, parenthood would be unnatural by the same standard. The same principle governs both issues. If nature dictates morality and the natural consequences for homosexuals is to be childless, then it's unnatural, excuse me, and therefore immoral for homosexuals to raise children. All right, so he's kind of just jumping into another example of sibling rivalry here, and it's kind of interesting, because a lot of people will say that homosexuality is fine because it's natural for that person. It's like a perverted take of the natural law view of ethics. But if you're saying that it feels natural for that person, then it runs in conflict with the natural state of that person, where if they're having sexual relations with the same sex, then they're not naturally going to have children, So now, and the reason why I say it's a perverted take on the natural ethic is because ethics that deal with how the natural world is takes an observation of how the world is supposed to behave. It's pretty clear when we look at biology that men and women are designed to have children together. And but if you're going based off of how you feel, and it feels natural, that's running in conflict with the natural law ethic, because the natural law ethic is to see how the natural world is independent of your subjective feelings. So if you're running based off of your subjective feelings and you're saying that it feels natural, that's kind of a misuse of the language. And so it's kind of like a superficial kind of sibling rivalry going on here. All right, so Koukl continues, artificial insemination of lesbians and adoptions by same-sex couples would be wrong by the logic of their own argument. This is a sibling rivalry type of suicide. All right, so infanticide. I have saved infanticide for last because it is the most difficult kind of suicide to understand. Let me start with an example. Think for a moment about how this simple-minded father closed a letter to his son in college. Son, if you didn't get this letter, please let me know and I'll send another. I made a copy. This makes us chuckle for a reason. The son would have to receive the letter in order to ask for a copy, but then he wouldn't need it. If he never got the original, he wouldn't know to ask for a replacement. There is a certain dependency relation in play here that is at the heart of infanticide. Sometimes an objection, the child, is dependent on a prior notion, the parent. That must be in place for the challenge to be offered. Saying vocal cords do not exist is not internally contradictory, but since it requires vocal cords to say it, making the statement results in contradiction. The parent concept, vocal cords, devours a child, the verbal claim that there are no vocal cords. That's why I call this variation infanticide. If a claim cannot be made unless the parent concept on which it depends is true, yet the claim denies the parent concept, then the argument commits infanticide. The child is destroyed by the parent it relies on. Bowling and madness. The most powerful example of infanticide that I know of has to do with the problem of evil. We're talking about this a lot tonight. And it's coming up again this week on Thursday. We looked at one complaint by a moral relativist related to evil that was compromised because of sibling rivalry. When moral relativists, people who believe in real universal morality, argue that God cannot exist because of evil. However, their view fails in a different way. It commits infanticide. Surprisingly, instead of evil being a good argument against God, I'm convinced it is one of the best evidences for God. And this is going back to the moral argument, because if God doesn't exist, it's argued that if God doesn't exist, then objective moral values and duties don't exist. But we have good reasons to believe that objective moral values and duties do exist, therefore God exists. And if the problem of evil is dependent on the fact that objective evil exists, then that objective evil needs an explanation. And the theist argues that, well, all the evil that we see around us is best explained. The objective evil that we see around us is best explained by the existence of God. All right, so Koukl continues. The first question the atheist must answer is, what do you mean by evil? His impulse will be to give examples of evil, murder, torture, oppression, but that misses the point. Why call those things evil to begin with? One must first have some clear idea what evil is before one can point to examples of it. I want you to think about concepts of good and bad for a moment. How do you know the difference between, say, a good bowler and a bad one? Only one thing matters in bowling. The person who knocks down the most pins wins. It's the score that counts. Knowing the difference between mediocre and masterful in anything requires a way of keeping score. There must be some standard of perfection for you to measure a performance. In bowling, the standard is 300. Every pin down in every frame. Some people have done this. If you are a golfer, one stroke per hole, a hole-in-one with every swing, is golfing perfection. No one has ever done this. Notice that even when perfection is not attainable, a golf score of 18 on an 18-hole course, a scoring system is still necessary to distinguish between excellence, mediocrity, and abject failure. In the same way, moral judgments require a way of keeping score to distinguish virtue from vice. This is the point I was making earlier about the failure of coupling moral relativism with a complaint about objective evil in the world. If there is no scoring system, relativism, there can't be any evil. Earlier in the chapter, I observed that we use the word evil when we see things that are not the way they are supposed to be. We have a standard in mind, a moral scoring system of sorts that allows us to recognize some moral shortfalls. The reason we say some things are evil is that we realize they score low on the goodness scale, so to speak. If there were no standard, there could be no error. C.S. Lewis notes, my argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust, but how had I gotten this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call something crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. This is the problem for the atheist. He must show where the moral scoring system comes from, the moral straight line that allows him to identify evil in the first place. Where is the transcendent standard of objective good that makes the whole notion of evil intelligible? Are moral laws the products of chance? If so, why obey them? What or who establishes how things are supposed to be? Here's an insight that helps. A moral rule entails a command along with a duty to obey it. Both require minds. Ethicist Richard Taylor explains a duty is something that is owed, but something can be owed only to some person or persons. There can be no such thing as a duty in isolation. The concept of moral obligation is unintelligible apart from the idea of God. The words remain, but their meaning is gone. Very important idea there. Like the moral landscape, even a lot of moral objectivists that are atheistic, they will lean into like a kind of Platonic view of morals, of good and evil and things of that nature, and they say that these things are necessarily existent, but how can it doesn't seem like they are. Like it seems like moral features, especially moral obligation, can only exist if there are creatures that in which those moral unless there are creatures that produce situations in which those moral obligations supervene on, and so like it seems that in order to say that there's objective morality and moral values, there needs to be some sort of necessary consciousness, and that's what a lot of people refer to as God. So God is the best explanation for moral features of the world because morality is always tied to agents. Okay, is with regard to moral obligation. All right, so there seems to be no good way to account for a transcendent standard of objective good. The moral rules that are violated by people who commit the evil in question without the existence of a transcendent moral rule maker. In the movie The Quarrel, Rabbi Hirsch challenges the secularist chain on this very point. If there's nothing in the universe that's higher than human beings, then what's morality? Well, it's a matter of opinion. I like milk, you like meat, Hitler likes to kill people, I like to save them. Who's to say which is better? And do you begin to see the horror of this? If there is no master of the universe, then who's to say that Hitler did anything wrong? If there is no God, then the people that murdered your wife and your kids did nothing wrong. A morally perfect God is the only adequate standard for the system of scoring that makes sense of the existence of evil to begin with. Since God must exist to make evil intelligible, evil cannot be evidence against God. The complaint commits infanticide. Another really good, another interesting aspect of any moral feature that includes a God like the Christian God is that it is superior in moral incentive as well as moral accountability. If such a being is able to dish out reward and punishment, then that provides people with incentive to do the moral thing, the right thing, and the good thing when nobody's looking. And accountability is along the same lines. If somebody does do an atrocity, let's say they shoot up a supermarket and then go into the car, instead of facing judgment on earth, they shoot themselves in the head. They're not escaping judgment. They're just giving themselves a one-way ticket to God's judgment seat. So they are still held accountable for their actions, even though they avoid going through the legal system here on earth with fellow humans, which I'm sure that they would have preferred if they knew, or if they could go back. Anyway, so any moral But this is not an argument to say that, oh, this proves that God exists. But what it does do is it shows that a moral theory that includes God is preferable. It's just for a lot of people, it's naturally preferable, in which there's better incentive and there's ultimate accountability. Where atheistic versions of morality, of moral models, lack the same kind of incentive structure and the same kind of accountability. They just do fail at providing as good or better accountability structures. All right, so Koukl continues, ironically, evil does not prove atheism. It proves just the opposite. There can be a problem of evil only if God exists. If it is a problem only a theist can raise, not an atheist. When an atheist voices the concern, he gets caught in a suicidal dilemma. Another thing about the problem of evil that many atheists fail to recognize, and mainly atheists, is that the problem of evil is not just a problem for the Christian or any God believer. It's a problem for anybody. That's a major feature of worldviews, is to provide an explanation of how reality is constituted, and then provide an explanation for why humans suffer, and then provide guidance on how to overcome that suffering. And all worldviews except naturalism. Naturalism, it just offers a framework that descriptions can be tied to, so it doesn't provide any explanations. From my perspective, it doesn't provide any explanations whatsoever. But with regard to suffering is just another feature that isn't explained, and it also doesn't provide any guidance on how to overcome suffering. So naturalism is worse than pretty much any religion, because it doesn't even endeavor to provide us with a guidance to overcome a major feature of our experience, which is suffering. You know, honestly, I'm not sure why people are naturalists, to be honest with you. So notice that this difficulty is a little different from the sibling rivalry problem with evil mentioned earlier. In that case, two incompatible contentions rested side by side. The first is that the true evil does not exist because morality is relative. The second was that the evil does exist, so God's existence is in question. When someone simultaneously holds that evil does and does not exist, there is an irreconcilable conflict, a sibling rivalry. One or the other has to go. With infanticide, however, the notion of morality, with its corresponding concept of evil, rests on the prior foundation of God's existence. God seems to be necessary in order for any conversation about evil to be coherent. Thus, it can never be used to refute God, because without him, the objection would have no meaning. So I think that he goes a little too strong here when he says it can never be used to refute God. Like I said earlier, a moral relativist or an atheist even, you do not need to have God in order to have a moral theory that would explain objective morality. It's just not as good. There's no reason to prefer it over a moral theory that includes God. There's literally no reason to prefer it over a God theory. All right, so moral atheists. Koukl continues, Christians who grasp that God is necessary for morality sometimes make a blunder. They mistakenly conclude that atheists cannot be moral. Michael Shermer, atheist editor of Skeptic magazine, fires back, look, I'm an atheist and I'm moral. So both the criticism and the response miss the point. The question is not whether an atheist can be moral, but whether he can make a sense of morality in a universe without God. Gravity still works, even when people have no explanation for why it works. The why it works question is what philosophers call the grounding problem. What grounds morality? What does it stand on? What explanation best accounts for a moral universe? What worldview makes the most sense out of the existence of evil or good? Atheism is a physicalist system that does not have the resources to explain a universe thick with non-physical things like moral obligations. Neither can some Eastern religions, by the way. If what we take as a reality is really an illusion, as classical Hinduism holds, then the distinction between good and evil is meaningless. Someone like the Judeo-Christian God must exist in order to adequately account for moral laws. If there is no God, then no conduct is actually good. A person's behavior, an atheist, can mimic another person's behavior, a Christian's, but without an external standard, a scoring system, neither the atheist nor the Christian can be genuinely good or bad for that matter. Theism solves the grounding problem for morality. It explains how even an atheist like Michael Shermer is genuinely capable of noble conduct. He still lives in God's world. More scientific suicide. I want to revisit a problem that came up earlier in Chapter 10. I showed how the idea that science is the only source of reliable truth commits what I call formal suicide. However, this notion is doubly dead because it commits infanticide too. The term scientism describes the view that science is the only reliable method for knowing truth about the world. Accordingly, everything outside of science is a matter of mere belief and subjective opinion, writes philosopher J.P. Moreland, of which rational assessment is impossible. Here is how scientism commits infanticide. Imagine you wanted to collect all knowledge in a box. Let's call it the truth box. Before any alleged truth could go into the box, it would have to first pass the scientific truth test. This is the claim of scientism. The problem is that your knowledge project could never get started because some truths would need to be in the truth box first before science itself could begin its analysis. The truths of logic and mathematics would have to be in the box along with the truth of the basic reliability of our senses. Certain practical truths expressed as moral requirements, like report all data honestly, would have to be in the box. The entire scientific method would have to be in the box before the method itself could be used to test the truthfulness of anything else. None of these truths can be established by the methods of science because science cannot operate in a knowledge vacuum. Certain truths, known through means other than science, must be in place before science can begin testing for other truths. Since the notion of scientism, the child, is inconsistent with the non-scientific presuppositions that make science possible, the parent. Scientism, as a comprehensive view of knowledge, commits infanticide. So freedom, knowledge, and reason. It always strikes me as odd when people say that try to advance arguments for determinism. Here's why. Oh boy, here we go. So I say that because I've studied this kind of stuff a lot, and I do think I'm a compatibilist, and I'm pretty much a compatibilist with everything. I think that human moral responsibility is compatible with divine foreknowledge. I think that human responsibility is compatible with physical determinism, and I even think that I do think that human responsibility is compatible with divine determinism, and it has a lot to do with aspects of God's knowledge. And I think that this goes off topic quite a bit, but it has a lot to do with the notion of middle knowledge that God has. And I'll be talking about middle knowledge some other time, but it's a different kind. I don't take middle knowledge, or I use middle knowledge in the same way Molinists use middle knowledge, but I am not a Molinist myself because I don't think that humans have libertarian free will. So, and like I said, it gets complicated, but it's very interesting. I love that conversation. All right, but anyway, going to see what Koukl has to say about determinism. Koukl continues, determinists claim that freedom is an illusion. Okay. Each of our choices is fixed, strictly determined beforehand by the circumstances that precede it. All of our choices are inevitable results of blind physical forces beyond our control. The problem with this view is that without freedom, rationality would have no room to operate. Arguments would not matter, since no one would be able to base beliefs on adequate reasons. One could never judge between a good idea and a bad one. One would hold beliefs only because he had been predetermined to do so. That's why it's odd when someone tries to argue for determinism. If determinism were true, the person would have been determined to believe in it, with others just as determined to disagree. You would have to admit that reasons don't matter, and that trying to think the issue through is a waste of time. Although it is theoretically possible that determinism is true, there is no internal contradiction as far as I can tell. No one could ever know if it were. Every one of our thoughts, dispositions, and and opinions would have been decided for us by factors out of our control. Genuine knowledge, by contrast, is based on sound reasons, not deterministic reactions. Therefore, arguments for determinism self-destruct. The parent determinism destroys a child, the argument of determinism. All right. So there's a lot of nuance here that isn't being acknowledged, and I just encourage everyone to look into it on their own. But and if you ever have any questions on it, feel free to reach out to me through email or comments or things like that nature, and we can work through it together. All right, so Koukl continues. The tactical goal of suicide. When I use any form of suicide tactic, I have a specific goal in mind. I want to show the person that there is a fatal inconsistency in her beliefs, a problem I think she would correct if she really understood it. Furthermore, the contradiction suggests that deep down she does not really believe everything she has said. When she says there is no truth, she actually believes there are some truths but is doubtful about others, probably the one you're talking with her about. When she says it's wrong for you to push your morality on others, it's clear that she doesn't think this is always wrong, only sometimes, probably in your case. I think you can see how the suicide tactic is not an end in itself but can be used as a bridge to further questions. What kind of evidence is adequate to give us confidence that something is true? Under what circumstances might we legitimately impose our morality on someone else? Do these circumstances apply here? So what we learned in this chapter. We finished our look at the suicide tactic by considering two final ways that views self-destruct: sibling rivalry and infanticide. Sometimes objections can come in pairs and that are logically inconsistent with each other, like children fighting. They are in opposition, siblings in rivalry. Since they contradict each other, both objections cannot be legitimate complaints. At least one can be eliminated by pointing out the conflict. Infanticide is a little more difficult to grasp. Sometimes an objection, the child, is dependent on a prior notion, the parent. That must be in place in order for the challenge to be offered. If a claim cannot be made unless the parent concept on which it depends is true, yet the claim denies the parent concept, then the parent kills the child, and the argument commits infanticide. We saw how this type of self-destruction applies to the problem of evil. Since God's existence is necessary to make the notion of evil intelligible, the existence of evil cannot be used as a proof that God does not exist. It indicates just the opposite. If evil exists, then good exists. If good exists, then God exists. Ironically, the existence of evil is powerful evidence for God, not against him. All right, so that's the end of chapter 12. All right, let's celebrate. We deserve it. Woohoo! Celebration time. Yeah. All right. Great job getting through the chapter with me, everybody. If you made it this far, really appreciate it. You guys are champions. I want to commend you guys for taking interest in this kind of topic and going through these books with me and going through this study. You know, this kind of stuff can be difficult at first and can be tiresome as well. You know, God has blessed me with having a high level of interest in this stuff, so I don't really get bored of it or tired of it, but I can definitely understand how some people can, you know. So I want to commend you guys on that. You guys are doing a great job of coming out. Oops, I left this. Don't forget to subscribe. Yeah, woo. But yeah. So and also these videos have been getting like dozens of views after they're posted, so that's good. So if you are coming in later to see the video after the live stream is done, thank you very much for watching these videos. If you want to stop in and watch them live, then feel free to come by on YouTube at 6 p.m. every Monday night, and we'll read the books together. We talked a lot about the problem of evil tonight and how it relates to logical errors and things of that nature, and we're going to be discussing that in more depth on Thursday. That's going to be the focus on Thursday at the church in New London. So if you can come out, then please do. But next week we're going to be learning how to take the roof off of people's worldviews and seeing what that's all about. All right. Thanks for coming out, guys. See you next week. God bless.
Hey, before you go, I hope you enjoyed today's enlightening discussion during our Christian Apologetics book study. It's always a blessing to come together to explore our faith and grow in our understanding. Your participation means the world to me, and I'm grateful for your continued support of Northeast Christian Apologetics. Remember, you can stay connected with me and access valuable resources by visiting my website at nechristianapologetics.com. There you'll find a wealth of articles, videos, and recommended reading material to deepen your knowledge of Christian apologetics. If you're as passionate as I am about equipping believers to defend their faith and engage in meaningful conversations, you can also support this ministry in various ways. One way to support this work is through patreon.com. By becoming a patron, you'll have access to exclusive content, early access to our discussions, and a chance to connect with like-minded individuals who share your passion for Christian apologetics. If Patreon is not your style, some people prefer to give me a one-time tip. And if you'd like to do that, then feel free to do so through Venmo or Cash App. But of course, there are many ways to support me. By praying for this ministry, sharing the content on social media, or simply spreading the word about what I do. Every bit of support goes a long way in helping me fulfill my mission. Once again, thank you for joining me today. Your presence and engagement enrich these discussions, and together, we're on a journey to strengthen our faith and share the good news with others. Stay tuned for more exciting book studies, thought-provoking discussions, and opportunities to grow your Christian apologetics journey. I look forward to seeing you again.